We are born free, and we will die free. The time in between, though, that's complicated. In that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Finding Freedom here on the Lions of Liberty Network. We are streaming on a Wednesday night. Normally stream on Thursdays, but tonight on Wednesday, we're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Rumble, and my personal Facebook page, since I know a lot of people are going to be interested in this particular topic here today. We're going to be talking with Dr. Thomas Hemmingway, and we're going to be talking about OZEMPIC and other similar drugs, these pharmaceutical weight loss drugs, and getting into some of the things that might not be well understood about them, some of the potential downsides to utilizing these pharmaceuticals. So I'll introduce Thomas in just a minute. Before I do that, I want to do a quick plug for my own other show that I just started. So those of you who've been following me know that I recently started that it just airs on my Finding Freedom feed. It's called Pursuit of Freedom, and it's documenting my journey from the corporate world to entrepreneurship, all the highs and lows, ups and downs, wins and losses. We've just done a couple episodes, but to get that show, you have to be subscribed to my Finding Freedom solo feed. So you're not going to get it on the Lions of Liberty Network feed. So definitely check that out. I've been having fun with it. I've been getting great feedback as well. So we'd love to have you on board and build community with that as well. So let's bring Dr. Thomas Hemmingway in. This is Dr. Thomas's second time on the show. And a little bit about him. He is a holistic and integrative medical doctor. He resides in Hawaii most of the year. I think also in Utah, but he's in Hawaii right now. So he also wrote a book recently called Preventable: 5 Powerful Practices to Avoid Disease and Build Unshakable Health. It's an awesome book. Highly recommend it. He's also the host of a really, really informative podcast that I listen to every episode. It's called Unshakeable Health. Thomas, welcome back to Finding Freedom.
Aloha, John. So great to be back. Thanks for having me back on. Always a pleasure to chat with you, to see you, and be a part of your amazing show.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming back on. And we do have some listeners I can see that are, or some watchers, I should say, that are on. So if people do have questions along the way, feel free to drop a question, and I'll see if we can bring it up and maybe address it. But essentially, like I said, we're going to be talking about these weight loss GLP-1 agonists, these pharmaceuticals. And, I think my listeners understand that, there is really a obesity problem in the United States. If you walk around an airport, a sporting event, pretty much anywhere you go, if you look around, I think you'll notice pretty quickly that it's a struggle for a lot of people. And that's not making light of it. It's a reality, and it's something that, really people want to address, obviously. And I think that these drugs have, to an extent, filled this need, at least to a little bit, at least so we thought. So let's get into the details of what these drugs are. So maybe a good place to start is, when people talk about OZEMPIC or the other similar named drugs, what are they? How do they work?
Yeah, let's, before we get too deep into the weeds, so to speak, as John said, I'm a medical doctor, and what we're going to be chatting about, just so you know, is not medical advice. This is largely my opinion based on lots of data. I'm going to share a couple of studies with you, but if you have specific questions and you want any advice, please go to your healthcare professional to discuss these things. We're not telling you what to do or not do. We're just getting some good information out there. Hopefully it's educational and a little bit entertaining at the same time. But just want to throw that out there, a little bit of a caveat as far as a disclaimer. As a physician, I'm not your physician, but I'm excited to speak about these agents because they can be super helpful. What they are is let's just say a replica, if you will, of a naturally occurring peptide that you and I, every single one of us, make every single day in response to eating a meal. Our bodies, particularly in the small intestine, secrete what's called GLP-1, which is glucagon-like peptide number 1. And so we make it. We make it each and every day, many times a day. Every time we eat, it gets released into the small intestine and into the bloodstream to help us to be able to process a meal and to not have our blood sugar go totally crazy after eating a meal. Because one of the things it does, it acts on the pancreas to secrete insulin. As we all know, after we eat a meal, our blood sugar is going to go up unless, of course, there's 0 carbohydrates, 0 protein, and only fats in there. Our blood sugar will always go up a little bit with a meal. And we don't want it to go up too high because there's problems associated with a really high blood sugar. Everything in the body is prone to, I'll just call it stickiness. You guys have heard of this measurement tool called the hemoglobin A1C that measures your blood sugar over about a 3-month period. And what happens is if your blood sugar runs high, I don't know if you guys have ever had soda spill like in your car or something, and you can't wipe it up really well, and then the water evaporates and it leaves that really kind of sticky residue. Well, that's kind of what happens when your blood sugar stays high over a long period of time. Everything gets really sticky inside the blood vessels and can be causing what we call inflammation. So your body wants to counteract that by getting the blood sugar down after a meal. And one of the ways it does it is by making its own and secreting it glucagon-like peptide number 1, GLP-1, meaning it's an agonist. It goes to the receptor, it activates it, goes to the pancreas, as I mentioned, secretes insulin. It also does a couple other things. It also makes your stomach kind of delay in the emptying. So the food kind of stays there a little bit longer and the stomach churns around. So it delays what we call gastric emptying. And if you take it as a pharmaceutical, what's different is that the dosing, in other words, the number of these GLP-1A particles in the blood are going to be way higher than they would be naturally. So yes, it is a substance you and I can both make, but when you're either injecting it, like in the form of, for example, semaglutide, which is probably the most popular one, called OZEMPIC, or Wegovy, which is also semaglutide, or Mounjaro, which is tirzepatide. All of these are injected typically about once a week. Most people take them that way, once a week. And what happens is the levels of this GLP-1 go really, really high in the blood to be able to decrease the blood sugar. They were actually designed for type 2 diabetics, and they were not actually designed at all for weight loss. But what they found, and these drugs, many people don't know this, they've been around for over a decade already. They've been around for, I think, almost 2 decades already. Quite a long time, but we just never had used them for weight loss before. But what we notice over the years of using them with type 2 diabetics is most of the folks that were using these agents were losing weight. And so we kind of studied a little bit further. We're like, well, what's really happening here? Yes, we know that insulin goes up, so it helps the blood sugar come down. But also these folks tend to have the delayed gastric emptying. In other words, their stomach just keeps the food in there longer, so they feel full. They feel kind of satisfied, satiated. Many of them feel nauseous, sadly, but they don't feel like eating. So their appetite goes way down. What happens is they typically consume many, many, many fewer calories, which helps them to lose weight. So they found in diabetics that were taking this for blood sugar control, a lot of them, in fact, the majority were losing weight. And then they thought, hey, why not use these for weight loss? So many of them, like I said, the Ozempic, for example, the semaglutide, has a sister medication also called semaglutide. It's actually the same medication, but then they market it under the trade name Wegovy at a higher dose for weight loss. Same thing goes with
so it's
Mounjaro.
the exact same drug.
Same thing. It's actually semaglutide. You can look it up. It could mean Ozempic. It could mean Wegovy. It's exactly the So it's not only a me too. Like a lot of times, different companies will manufacture different drugs in the same class, and we kind of call those me too drugs. But this is actually the same medication being manufactured by the same manufacturer under a different name to get a different indication so that they can sell it to more people out there under a different name. Most people have no idea it's actually the same drug. But anyway.
Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah.
So question on,
Yeah.
and I don't know a whole lot about how this drug is administered, but I think you said like once a week people are taking a shot. So
Usually
is that
an
like
injection once a week? Yeah.
when they take this shot, is it, at the very beginning, is there a spike in the GLP-1 and then over the course of the week it comes back down?
Yeah. So, I mean, there is it's more of a depot or a slower release type of thing, which is the reason why you only need to take it about once a week, generally speaking. Most of these agents, like Ozempic, Mounjaro, they are usually prescribed once a week because they stick around. And the reason why, and I didn't mention this because I didn't want to get too deep into the weeds, but what's different about these synthetic, if you will, the pharmaceutical, is that they typically administer it with a blocker of the enzyme that breaks down GLP-1. And so when they are giving themselves this medication, usually in the form of injection, it's also being administered with an antagonist to the enzyme which breaks down GLP-1. So it actually sticks around longer. So it's actually not just the GLP-1 that they're getting in this injection, but they're typically also getting a antagonist, if you will, to the enzyme that breaks down GLP-1. So both the GLP-1 that they're injecting, which is huge doses compared to what's naturally occurring in the body, plus what the body's making already, sticks around longer, doesn't get degraded. And so in that sense, that those levels stay up a lot longer than you would think, because in the body, you only release a small amount. It's typically associated with a meal. The levels of GLP-1 then go down, and then they go up again with the next meal. That's kind of the way it's supposed to happen. But when you take these medications, your GLP-1A is up for a long, long time. And that's why many people who take them, they feel nauseous all the time. I've had many patients take them over the years, and one of their biggest complaints is that they just don't feel quite right, settled in their stomach. They feel a little bit nauseated. They never have a lot of appetite. So hence, they're eating less calories, and they tend to lose significant weight. In 1 year's time, most of them are losing close to 10, even up to 20% of their body weight over the course of the year. So if you weigh 200 pounds, I mean, you're easily losing 20 pounds on these agents. So maybe even up to 40 pounds. So it's a pretty significant weight loss. The part that we'll get into, I'm sure, that I'm not a big fan of is with this weight loss is not just preferentially what you would like to lose, which is the fat or the adipose tissue. But many of these folks, in fact, up to 50% of the weight loss can be lost muscle. And that's where I see as the big challenge with these agents is that you're losing not only some of the adipose tissue or some of the fat, but a lot of times a lot of muscle gets lost along with it, which is actually making things worse with respect to their metabolism and keeping the weight off over time.
Yeah, that's the scary part. I mean, because muscle is so important for aging, right? For keeping our metabolism up as we get older. And I do want to circle back, just put a tag here to come back to talk about the gut health side of it, because I know I've heard you say before, all health begins in the gut. So we're going to circle back to that and how Ozempic and these drugs impact the gut. But to drill down on that muscle, because there's people out there who say that people who are taking Ozempic for many months, they get an Ozempic face, kind of just like the skin looks like it just kind of hangs in a different way. And this, from my knowledge, seems like it is a real thing. It is a real side effect. What's causing that? And what is causing with the GLP-1 synthetic agonist? What is causing the muscle to be lost as opposed to just the fat?
Yeah, so a couple of things, primarily with respect to the muscle loss, which is my biggest sort of concern, if you will, about these agents, especially when taken by millions and millions of people right now, just in the US alone. I mean, across the world, we're talking probably hundreds of millions of people taking these medications. I mean, it's a huge industry, but the weight loss, most of it, people are super pumped about. They're excited. But what they don't think about is that up to 50% of the weight loss can be lost muscle. In fact, Peter Attia, many of you folks may have heard of him. He had a recent book come out in the last year or so called Outlive. And in his personal experience, up to 50% of the weight loss that he's seen in his clinics associated with these GLP-1 agonists has been muscle. And that's on the high end.
Wow.
In the patients that I've seen with this, I would say it's closer to 20 to 30% of the weight loss is muscle, but that's huge if you think about it. Let's say, for example, you were fortunate enough to lose 50 pounds. And if you're in a Peter Attia study, 25 pounds of that 50 would have been muscle. Have you ever seen how much muscle is 25 pounds? Think of ground beef. You may cook 1 to 2 pounds at a time. 12 times that, right? Sitting on the counter, 25 pounds of meat or of muscle is a lot of muscle. I mean, you don't want to be losing that kind of muscle for a couple of reasons. One, like you said, John, muscle is literally the secret to your metabolism. It is the secret to longevity. It is the secret to feeling amazing, to having the energy that you want, and to live long and well. You got to have muscle mass. So this is my biggest concern about the Ozempic, is losing significant muscle mass. And the reason that happens primarily with folks is because, number one, they're consuming way fewer calories because they feel a little bit kind of low grade nauseated all the time. They don't have a lot of appetite. And when they do eat, they don't feel like eating things that are super nutritious. Let me give you an example. A patient that I know very well, obviously I'm not going to share the name, but one of my patients was on this medication even before they met me, and they were pumped about a 20-pound weight loss. But knowing this patient over the years, I looked at him and I said, I am so excited that you lost this 20 pounds, but what I see and that what concerns me is you're walking around with less muscle than you had before. I mean, I could see it in his arms, in his face. He just didn't have that muscle mass anymore. And maybe, he was focusing more on the scale and the number that he saw because he was excited about the 20-pound weight loss, but he wasn't recognizing that he had lost significant muscle mass. The primary reason is poor overall input. And most of these folks, they don't even think about it. But let me just give you his example. He told me, and this is, I'm not making this stuff up. He said, look, doc, I don't really have much of an appetite. So this is all I eat in a whole day. In the morning, I'm busy. I'm on my way to work. I grab one McMuffin at McDonald's. That's it. That's all I eat in the morning, nothing else. And then for lunch, I have one small, and I know it sounds crazy, but this literally is all he could even eat. One small little bowl, the small cup of chili at Wendy's. I can't eat anything else because I'm just having no appetite. I'm nauseated all the time. And at dinner, I don't even feel like eating dinner. So the only thing I can eat, because I'm nauseated, I usually eat a handful of chips before I go to bed because I want to put something in my body. And so his 3 meals were of the lowest quality you could ever imagine, right? Like McDonald's meal, a Wendy's meal, and then some chips before dinner. But his whole day was like 1,200 calories. And he was used to eating between 2,000 and 3,000 calories. And so his caloric input went way down. So that's why he lost a ton of weight quickly. He lost 20 pounds within a few weeks.
So it's still standard American diet. It's just shrunken down standard American diet.
And very poor quality. He's not getting a lot of nutrition there, not a lot of protein. And so when you don't get a lot of protein input, you lose muscle, because the only way your body can produce all of the amino acids it needs for daily life, like literally every single day, your body has to manufacture the enzymes that it needs to be able to make energy, for example, which is called ATP in the body, right? You may have heard of that. In the mitochondria, this is what powers this process of making energy. You need enzymes, you need input. And if you don't have the essential amino acids coming from the food you're eating, you get it from the muscle that your body sacrifices. It literally breaks down its own muscle tissue to provide those essential amino acids into the input for all of these reactions that keep us alive on a daily basis. Just to stay alive, we literally are eating ourselves up, chewing up our own muscle mass to stay alive if we're not consuming appropriate amounts of protein. So most of these people don't eat enough protein, number one, because they don't have any appetite and they don't feel like, and protein is satiating. If anybody has gotten up in the morning, had their first meal, packed it with 3 or 4 eggs, maybe some other protein input, whether it be like a Greek yogurt or maybe some sausage or something that has protein as well, slice of cheese, like they're full. Like they don't even feel like eating for 4, 5, 6 or more hours because protein is satiating. But these folks start with no appetite and protein is so satiating anyway that they tend to eat very little of it. So they're losing muscle on account of less intake of protein. And then most of them also are doing less with that. They don't feel amazing on these medications most of the time. So they don't feel like working out. They don't feel like doing extra things at the gym to lift weights or body weight exercises because these medications make them feel nauseous all the time. Many of them feel bloated. Many of them they don't feel good. They're just like in this constant low grade, like stomach upset, like all the time. So that's a big concern. And it's not anything inherent to the medication. The medication doesn't make you lose protein or lose muscle, but most people don't put the appropriate inputs in for the reasons I just described based upon how they feel and their knowledge of the diet and things, because maybe nobody tells them when they start, hey, one thing you got to focus on when you take these medications is make sure you get your minimum 100 grams of protein in every single day. And if you're a man like my age that's wanting to build muscle mass, you're going to want to get 150 grams of protein into your body every single day. And then the rest of it, if you want to tailor back the amount of carbs you're eating, tailor back some of the fats, totally cool with that. But don't skip out on the protein. You got to get your protein.
So question just came in from YouTube here. And King Yeti asks, what about Ozempic in combination with vitamins and supplements? I think that's a really good question. And maybe you can talk about, because there are some vitamins and supplements that can help to do this, boost your GLP-1 in a more natural way.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of like I said at the outset, there are many people who will benefit from these medications. And I will even prescribe them from time to time in the right setting with the right patient with the caveats that we kind of talked about. Having people make sure to get enough protein into their diet, making sure they're doing some muscle building activities, some kind of what we call resistance training nowadays, which is something with weights, whether it be your body weight, doing push-ups, pull-ups, air squats, whatever, or something in the gym with actual pushing up real weight. But there are some supplements that can be really, really helpful. Many of the which actually John may be familiar with because he's very interested in gut health as well. There are some supplements that will not only improve your own gut health, but they can improve your secretion and production of GLP-1. One of those is berberine. Berberine is amazing for not only gut health, but also improving your own GLP-1 secretion. Also, it's good for maintaining a good, even blood sugar. Another of these is green tea extract or green tea. Has some properties that are really enhancing the secretion of GLP-1. Another is anything that has a good quantity of fiber in it, because when you increase the fiber in your diet, whether it be from just eating lots more vegetables than you used to eat, or fresh fruits, vegetables, anything that's a fibrous type of vegetable. My favorite is like Brussels sprouts, artichokes. These kinds of things have a bunch of fiber. What happens there is they feed the gut. When the gut breaks down the fiber, it produces what's called short chain fatty acids, or SCFA, some people call them, SCFA, short chain fatty acids. These bacteria make the short chain fatty acids out of the fiber that you're feeding. And think of the fiber as partly feeding the gut bacteria, because you can't really digest it in a way that gives you nutrients from the fiber per se. But it actually is food for the bacteria that live in your gut. And there's more bacteria in your gut than there are human cells in your body, like 30 to 60 trillion. I mean, it's a huge number. And so they need the proper nutrition, and it's primarily found in fiber and fibrous foods, like the so-called prebiotics that have a bunch of fiber in them, like I just described. So when you do that and the gut gets the fiber, it breaks it down. It makes what's called a short chain fatty acid. Those smaller particles feed the cells of the GI tract, these so-called enterohepatocytes, the cells that make up the lining of the gut, as well as other cells there that will use these short chain fatty acids as kind of a fuel for them. So they're kind of feeding your own cells. It's this really cool symbiotic relationship. So these cells, these enterocytes, are feeding on the short chain fatty acids that your gut bacteria made, And in turn, they produce more of the GLP-1. So they can actually produce natural GLP-1 in sequence with the help of the gut bacteria that you're feeding with those fibrous vegetables, or if you add fiber to your diet through other ancillary ways, like a supplement, like John and I both take a supplement that has fiber in it that enhances the health of our gut, that can feed those gut bacteria. So many ways of getting your gut healthy also help your body produce more of its own natural GLP-1. So yes, there are things you can add into the diet that will support you better when you take these medications like Ozempic, Mounjaro. I would say the main thing too to focus on besides gut health would be to make sure you're getting adequate protein and getting that intake between 100 and 150 grams per day, and doing some resistance training exercise. Those would be my key essentials if you were to be on one of these medications, because they do help many people, especially if you have type 2 diabetes. They actually work really well. The problem is, and John can let me know if you want to talk about this, the problem is over the long term, if you quit these medications, most of the weight usually comes back. And that's the issue that bums me out for a couple of reasons. But have any of your viewers or folks been interested to find out why that happens?
Yeah, let's definitely get into that, because I mean, I've talked a lot on this show about, sort of this pharmaceutical model that really there is an incentive for these pharmaceutical companies to have repeated sales, to have a drug that you're on forever. So, I mean, literally this is the way they lose weight. If they get off it, they gain weight back, and they're probably in a worse place than they were before they did it, unfortunately. So it's just, before we get into that though, one thing that is just it's interesting, and I think it's really sad that the state of our healthcare in the United States, where we do have doctors who are prescribing this. And there are a lot of good doctors out there. So I'm not saying all doctors are bad. Please don't, construe it that way. But it's just so unfortunate that we don't have more doctors, like yourself and many others out there who, if they were going to put a patient on this, they would be sure to talk about getting the proper nutrition and protein and exercise. Just to get your high level view on why do you think that is, that really doctors are not more aware of really the side effects of this, and the potential for the really, really negative impacts of losing the muscle?
Yeah, I think that the sad truth is that still present day, most medical doctors receive the overwhelming majority of their training in a medical school environment that largely pushes pharmaceutical treatments for any ailment. It's still this model where what's the pill for whatever ill you might have? What's the pharmaceutical that targets that one thing, whether it be elevated blood pressure, whether it be the elevated blood sugar or elevated cholesterol? They're looking for one simple target, and they leave out the bigger picture, which would most likely in many cases prevent the need for medications or pharmaceuticals altogether if you were to dig a little bit deeper to the actual root cause of the ailment. Say this obesity epidemic, like you mentioned at the outset, it is as common as you say. 7 out of 10 people currently today in the US are overweight or obese. 7 of 10 people. If that's not an epidemic, I don't know what is. It's so pervasive and it bums me out. I mean, it's just, it pains me to see this getting worse and worse and worse every single year. Yet we are producing more and more pharmaceuticals, more and more very specific targeted medical therapeutics or pharmaceutical agents or drugs that target specific things along this pathway, yet it's not helping our health at all. And the main reason for it is we're missing the big picture. We're missing the true cause of obesity is inflammation related to 5 key factors, one of which is the diet that you are, putting into your body every single day. We just don't pay attention to that. And doctors, bless their hearts, they're well trained in what they know. They're very smart and bright, but they don't get a lot of nutritional training in their medical school. Like some get none. It's crazy to even say that, but some
Wow.
literally get zero nutritional training in their medical school. Most have an average between 2 and 4 hours, but it's really, really low, as well as training in sort of the preventative care with respect to things like lifestyle medicine, which includes your diet, right? Your movement or exercise, your sleep, your stress, and how you manage and optimize stress in your life, your gut health. Most of them get zero training in gut health. I mean, it's crazy how little training doctors get in sort of the preventative measures that could actually preclude or prevent most of the common ailments. Right now, today, John, 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death worldwide, not just in the US, are almost entirely preventable, right? Take heart disease, leading cause of death, women and men worldwide. Yet we have amazing treatments for heart disease in the US. Our incidence is going up and up and up, and more people die each and every year from heart disease than ever before. It's still the number one killer. Still, present
And
day,
it
despite
seems like
all the interventions
mainstream
available.
medicine is giving the old advice that they've been giving for the past 20 years. You know, watch your sodium, avoid red meat. They're not talking about sugar. They're not talking about, you know, those types of things. They're not talking about movement and building muscle. It's just crazy. I mean, how far behind modern medicine is than, you know, what you know, what's on the cutting edge, what's being innovated from a preventative standpoint.
Yeah, typically 2 decades behind is kind of the usual lag, if you will, with respect to the latest and greatest current medical research, and the implementation through mainstream medicine takes about 20 years to get that into the curriculum, if you will. Things like gut health eventually will be in the curriculum for medical schools, but not yet. Things like we were talking about a minute ago, increasing your protein, increasing your weight bearing or resistance training exercise, because your muscle is the key to not only your metabolism today, but to your longevity tomorrow. Nobody's talking about that in medical school. They will. There's actually a bunch of data on that. There's a bunch of data on gut health, but it takes a while. So these doctors, though very much well-meaning, and they're doing the best they can, but they're listening to the wrong sources, if you will, which primarily are based in pharmaceutical treatments, because I hate to say it, and I don't want to be controversial, but pharmaceutical companies largely support medical education. That's just the way it is. Big food, big pharma, they're the ones paying for medical education across the US. They're the ones involved in policy making, as we all know. And so it's very difficult to get into the training of medical professionals anything outside of that. I hate to call it a norm, but just outside of that rhetoric, if you will, that involves primarily the symptom-based treatment, where somebody has a thing, whether it be high blood pressure or high cholesterol or elevated blood sugar. They're not looking at what's causing those symptoms, if you will. They're just looking at what's the simple, easy button to treat it. Oh, you have elevated blood pressure? Let's give you something to increase your insulin. Blood sugar? Let's go for insulin. Blood pressure? Let's go for something that targets a certain type of relaxation of an artery there that we can give them. Pharmaceutically, they're not thinking about other things. Like exercise is probably the best medication known to man. And if we could put exercise in a pill, it would be the biggest blockbuster drug of all times. Like, hands down, if you could put exercise into a pill, but it's never going to happen. Right now, I've been told.
I think that's what a lot of people think OZEMPIC is. I think they think it's exercise in a pill. That's or in a shot.
Except you get no benefit from the part that exercise gives you, which would be increasing muscle mass, increasing your what's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which actually helps with your brain, not only alertness in present day, but preventing dementia in the future. For example, many people have heard of the term type 3 diabetes, which is sort of analogous to dementia or the neurocognitive ailments, because that's one of the leading causes of death and morbidity in the US nowadays are the dementias. And they are primarily preventable through increasing your exercise, weight training, improving your diet, getting better, more quality, and for most of us, longer sleep, shooting for 7 to 8 quality hours of sleep per night. These kind of very simple things that we can do on a daily basis would literally change the course of not only modern day medicine, but our own personal histories without the need for spending trillions of dollars in pharmaceuticals. Yet It's not necessarily the quick fix, easy button that most doctors access through the pharmaceuticals. It's just not. But it is available. It is cheap and less expensive, and it's doable. It just takes a little bit of knowledge, number one, and then what are some simple action steps you can incorporate into your daily life, and we can certainly talk about that.
Yeah, we talked about dementia there. If we could just drill down there for just a minute. It does seem like dementia is on the rise across the board. I'm just curious, what do you think? You talked about, how some ways to prevent it with exercise and diet, but are there other factors, other variables, maybe environmental things that have there been any studies done with, maybe certain pharmaceuticals that are taken, statins or otherwise, that, could, be a precursor to dementia?
Yeah, dementia is one of these things that we're missing the mark in a lot of respects. We've been targeting this protein many people have heard about called amyloid, beta amyloid protein, for decades now, because on pathological slides 50 years ago, when we first discovered what we thought was the cause of Alzheimer's dementia, for example, we saw increased prevalence of these plaques in the brain, primarily composed of what's called beta amyloid. So this whole theory was developed more than 50 years ago that dementia was caused by beta amyloid deposition in the brain. And so we sort of blamed this protein, if you will, as the cause. And so we've been looking for medications, pharmaceuticals that target this beta amyloid. And there's been probably dozens of them come up with over the course of the last several decades. And guess what? None of them work to any significant fashion. And they're targeting what we thought was the cause of dementia. Well, here's the thing. We're probably targeting the wrong thing, because beta amyloid actually may be something the body is placing as a protective mechanism. Because what we find when we dig a little bit deeper, backpedal a little bit and try to figure out why beta amyloid is being deposited in the brain anyway, it's usually in response to some kind of inflammatory insult. And what I mean by that is, in the brain, just like anywhere else in the body, we are prone to a process called chronic inflammation. This is not what happens when you stub your toe and it gets a little red and painful. That's acute inflammation, which is a good thing. It helps your body heal. It helps get rid of illness and bacteria, viruses. If you're sick, that's the good kind of inflammation, acute inflammation. Chronic inflammation is what's happening every single day, day in, day out, 365 days a year. It's kind of this slow, kind of smoldering fire, if you will, that never gets put out. And it causes in the brain the deposition of beta amyloid protein. And so what we're missing the whole point. We're attributing the cause of dementia to this beta amyloid protein, which actually doesn't appear to really be causal, because every drug that's targeted this has never really been significantly helpful, useful, or even shown to have significant benefit, despite billions of dollars being spent in both the development of these medications and so on. And I think the reason is we're missing the mark. We're not going deep enough to what's the real cause of dementia, which I believe is chronic inflammation. And if we were to target the chronic inflammation that's happening on the level of the brain, we could really prevent this dementia in the first place. And in fact, most cases, there was a big study, and I think some of your viewers and listeners may be familiar with it. It came out in the medical journal called JAMA, which is Journal of the American Medical Association, in the neurology section of this. Just a few months ago, this big article came out, and it was written, I had it pulled up here, and I'll Hendricks is the name of the guy that wrote it. And he was finding that there's evidence of early precursors to dementia in the brain of so-called healthy individuals as early as their 30s. So I passed my 30s 20 years ago. I'm into my 50s now, and I'm really hoping I don't have any dementia brewing there. But one of the things that he found correlated with the presence of what he calls early cognitive impairment, which is kind of like a precursor to dementia, is a low grade level of inflammation in the body. It correlated quite well. So it's kind of preliminary. We can't say it's causal at this point as of yet, but he found a significant correlation between inflammatory marker, or a marker of inflammation called CRP, which is C-reactive protein, in the levels of people's blood. As they followed them over time, those that had elevated CRP in the blood were more prone to getting dementia later in life. So this I thought was super interesting because we can measure this really easy. This measure, you can go ask your doctor about it. Hey, get me a highly sensitive CRP test.
Really?
And they can get that done. You'll get the result by tomorrow. And that can give you an indication if you have a low level of inflammation going on in your body right now. And that can be a precursor to not only dementia, but to heart disease,
Right.
other conditions that you may be prone to if you don't change something in your life. So that's a simple test, looks at inflammation. This study that just came out in the JAMA neurology section a few months ago by Hendricks looked at that, and having evidence of sort of early precursors to dementia as early as folks in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, which I think should alarm us a bit, because we've always considered dementia to be a problem of the elderly, quote unquote, right? 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds. Well, there's evidence of this happening much earlier on, and it could be prevented potentially if we look at natural ways to decrease inflammation. Like you already mentioned, John, things like improving your sleep, increasing your exercise, weight training, weight resistance, eating foods that are anti-inflammatory, for example. We could go into a couple other things, but I think we're missing the mark with respect to dementia and what's really causing it.
Yeah, well, essentially, I mean, seems like to me, to a layperson, that inflammation really is the root to so much, to potentially dementia, to heart disease, to cancers, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that is rooted in the gut, right? That's where this is coming from. So I guess we'll just close with this, kind of wrap everything together. You know, Ozempic negatively impacting the gut potentially. You know, inflammation, a lot of that is coming from poor gut health. What are some things that, you know, as a doctor, you know, to your patients that you recommend for people to, you know, really, I hate to use the word heal your gut, but, you know, give your gut a better environment to thrive, to fight off the bad microbes?
Yeah, no, I'm going to give you a super simple recipe. It's something that each of us can do every single day. If you want more on this specifically, I've got at least 2, maybe even 3 chapters in my book, Preventable, that John talked about at the outset of this little discussion, that detail out gut health in a very simple, but yet pretty exciting way with lots of data and how we can get our gut healthy. In that book, Preventable, it's on Amazon. You can grab it today. But let me just simplify it really, really quick. The number one thing is paying attention to what goes into your mouth. What you feed yourself also feeds the gut, like we talked about earlier. If you just simply eat real, whole, natural foods that don't have the big 3, as I like to call them, I just ask people to avoid 3 things. Eat everything else, just avoid 3 things. Avoid the highly processed grains and flours, right? Gluten is the tip of the iceberg here. Highly processed sugars, especially high fructose corn syrup. Also, artificial sweeteners are not amazing. And the industrial oils, like anything from a seed, whether it be from corn or soybean, canola, anything that says vegetable oil, avoid it like the plague. Just eat the oils that come from natural sources, like an olive, right? We've been eating olive oil for centuries. In fact, I didn't have time to mention this, but olive oil will increase the natural production of GLP-1. Olive oil, extra virgin olive oil. Add that to your diet and take away all the crappy vegetable oils that are in almost every processed food. So be careful with anything you buy that comes in a box or in a bag, packaging of some kind, or with a barcode. Anything that's processed, be wary of those big 3. Some kind of highly processed grain or flour, sugar, or some processed sugar or corn syrup, or the seed oils, the vegetable oils. Almost every packaged food will have one, or most of them have all 3 of those things in there. So if you avoid that and you just shop on the perimeter of the grocery store, you're going to be in good shape. Number 2, pay attention to your sleep. Doctors rarely pay attention to sleep unless the patient says, hey, I'm not sleeping well. And then what do? They get their prescription pad out and they write you some kind of a sleep aid, which most of them don't even work well. They'll put you to sleep, but they won't increase the quality of your sleep. Right. You're looking for quality in your sleep because you want to get into those deeper phases, stage 3 and stage 4 sleep, where it's actually really restful. Your brain goes into this amazing period where it flushes out all the toxins, including beta amyloid. And that only happens effectively when you are sleeping. It's the only time that happens. So if you're not sleeping, your chances of dementia are going through the roof. And this caught my attention because as a guy who has been a physician for over 20 years, I often have to work at night. And so I don't get good quality sleep. And so when that happens to me, I make it a special point to go into a dark room after my shift, put in my earplugs, put on my cheesy eye cover that my kids make fun of, and I try to get as quality of sleep as I can after being up all night, because one night, as little as one night of decreased sleep has been shown to increase your chances of having inflammation in your brain, which could lead to dementia later in life. So pay attention to your sleep. It's simple, it's free, doesn't cost anything. I mean, spend a couple bucks on an eye cover, some earplugs, a fan, or whatever means you need to stay cool. You'd be amazed at how beneficial something simple like that. And then we talked about movement already. Make sure you just move throughout the day. There's a cool study that I loved recently that showed that smaller, shorter bursts of movement, whatever it is. Like right now, I'm standing as we're podcasting here. I can do a little air squat, just moving around. If you move your body for 3 to 10 minutes every hour, it's actually going to be more beneficial than moving it 30 minutes all at once. Super interesting. So many of us say, I don't have time for 30 minutes of exercise. If you just set your little timer on your watch to beep every 1 hour, and you spend some time between, I would just say 3 and 5 minutes of moving your body, like put on your favorite song on the radio or on your device or whatever, and just do movement to one song. That's usually around 3 or 4 minutes. And you do that every single hour throughout the day, you're going to be moving your body more than 30 minutes in a day. Or get a standing desk, or do half of the day at a standing desk. And, simple things like that just increase your movement. Pay attention to your sleep. Watch what you're putting into your body. The other thing is just exposure to things that may not be helpful, whether it be through, toxins, if you will, from plastic water bottles here. I have my glass water bottle, for example. Try to not use plastic water bottles. Try to not use things that are heavily laden with toxins like pesticides and things like that if you can. So watch those other inputs you may not think about. Also avoid toxic people. If there's people in your life that are bringing you down, that are causing you chronic stress is one of the worst things for increasing inflammation, both in your brain and your body. And they can be avoided by maybe, detaching yourself from people that are toxic. Maybe it's connecting with people that raise you up, that elevate you, because social connection actually is one of my favorite new things to help people recognize, because it's also simple, it's free, doesn't cost money. You connect with people socially that help raise you up, you elevate one another. That also decreases inflammation. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but all of those things are simple. They're all free. They're readily available. They're also described in the book.
Yeah. They're all described in the book. And also you get into a lot of this on your podcast too. So give a plug for your podcast, for your book, and anything else that you have going on.
Yeah. Thanks, John, so much. Yeah. I can easily be found on Instagram, Dr. Thomas Hemingway. That's just Dr. Then my name, Thomas Hemingway. And my website is Dr. Thomas Hemingway, drthomas.hemingway.com, or you can just type in thomashemingway.com. It'll come up. The podcast is called Unshakeable Health. I produce a new episode just about every single week. Usually it comes out on a Thursday. And we talk about exciting stuff like the stuff we talked about here. OZEMPIC, we talked about a few weeks back. We talked about dementia a few weeks before that. Lots of cool topics that people ask me about. I just make a whole podcast on it because I like to serve you. And if you have something you would like to hear about in a podcast, you can message me over on Instagram. You can even email me or jump on over to my website where I have contact stuff over there. I have some courses there that are amazing. And I'm also, which is really exciting for me, I'm also later this summer going to be starting for the first time ever a really cool private one-on-one medical practice where you can work with me individually and I can help you optimize your health and your life, not only avoid disease, but get you into your best health so you can be thriving and not just surviving life. So thanks so much, John. I appreciate you.
Yeah. And that's so cool. You're doing that really one-on-one medical practice. I think that's the wave of the future. So very cool to see you jumping on board that. But thanks for coming on the show, Dr. Thomas Hemingway. And yeah, check him out, his podcast and his book. We'll see you.
Thanks, John.
All right, guys, that was the interview with Dr. Thomas Hemingway. Hopefully you enjoyed the content. A lot of information. Probably one of those episodes that you're going to want to go back and maybe listen to again and take some notes. Like Thomas talks about there, him and I do use a lot of the same supplements to address gut health, to address the root cause that we talked about, the root cause of so much that ails the body. As Dr. Thomas often says on his podcast, all health begins in the gut. That's something that I wholeheartedly believe, and I've seen a change in myself and in my own health by addressing my gut health. So if anyone out there has questions, you want to reach out to me, you can get me on Facebook, on Twitter, @John Odermatt, Instagram, @John Odermatt, or send me an email, john@lionsofliberty.com. I'm really grateful that Dr. Thomas Hemingway gave so much time today to do a deep dive on this incredibly important topic. And, there are so many people out there who are struggling with weight loss, battling. It's a serious problem. I think he said 7 in 10 people are trying to lose weight. And, this episode was not to shame anybody who is using any of these drugs to try to lose weight, but just to, shine a light and put some, maybe a lens that you haven't seen before in some areas that maybe could benefit you. And as Dr. Thomas talked about at the top, this is not medical advice. None of this is medical advice. Be sure to consult with your doctor. So with that being said, I'll be back next week with another great episode. In the meantime, always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.